Hello, and welcome to the Theological Family Ministry Podcast, a podcast for parents as well as children and youth ministry leaders. We are dedicated to showing how theological study and biblical application relate to the discipleship of children and youth. As always, we're hosted by Pastor Ben Palaz, the pastor of family and children's discipleship at Curtis Baptist Church in Augusta, Georgia, and Tony Trusoni, the family and student pastor at Faith Family Church in Finksburg, Maryland.
Good morning, Ben. How you doing today?
Doing pretty well. Getting geared up for Vacation Bible School, so starting to feel the crunch of that, but thankfully good shape. My intern has really helped me a lot this year, so shout out to Hannah for appreciation for all that she's done. So how about you?
I'm doing well. So, by the way, I do want to say, though I have not met her, I am thankful that she's done some of the work editing the podcast this year, so that's been a huge help.
Yes, she has. So once again, Hannah has been a big help in many categories. She's a go-getter.
Praise the Lord. So, yeah, that I'm gearing up for a vacation, spending some more time with the kids than even normal. And with kids being mentioned, I want to ask, do you think that most parents are happier than non-parents?
Man, I don't know that I have. I know that I did read about 7-8 years ago that parents of younger children, in particular, were regarded as some of the angriest in society, based on some research. So I don't know. That's just one thing there. I think that a lot of parents are happy. Not happy all the time.
Yes.
Like the song says.
Yeah, so there was a report from Washington Post, that Washington Post tracked, that I was reading in preparation from this. And it said that in the United States, at least, parents are on average 12% less happy than non-parents. That's referring to parents with children or teens in the home. Significantly, in that sense, less happy having kids. So I assume this means, everyone should just stop having kids now, right?
There you go. Well, sounds like a recipe for success.
Well, I think sometimes that's the way it's treated in certain sources. And we're going to be talking some about this topic today. We're going to be talking about the value of kids, even if they don't necessarily make you happier. I don't know if they do or not. I think some of the studies are looking for definitions of happiness that aren't really Christian definitions of happiness. But nonetheless, I think we need to understand whether kids have any inherent value, whether Christians are pro-kids is what we're calling this podcast. And I want to ask, you've seen less movies and TV than I have. You're not the film buff that I've been. But if movies and TV shows were reality, when would people have kids, and how many kids would they have?
Maybe never. Or when they had lots of cash, and if they do have the kids, maybe 1 or 2 kids. Maybe a boy and a girl, or maybe just one. That's my take on it. How about it? What do you think? I mean, I have watched TV and movies,
yeah,
just not in the same way.
I think definitely you're right. Actually, many of our listeners have probably seen the movie Avengers, Infinity War, and now Endgame, and I thought something was fascinating. Oh, yeah, something was fascinating with me. If have you seen Infinity War yet?
I have not.
Okay.
I've heard some things.
So I'm not going to worry about spoiling that. I'm going to go ahead and spoil it for you because it's been like a year and a half, my friend. For the sake of. And the very end of the movie, this bad guy Thanos, he snaps. He feels that basically overpopulation in the universe is a problem, and he snaps and he gets rid of half of all humans, so that future generations can live in a prosperous world, basically. And I was thinking, In the Marvel Universe, though, Thanos' job is done for him by parents, because I think literally in of all the Marvel characters, there's one case of parents having more than one child. And almost all of the families start, like Iron Man has a child in the most recent movie. And again, I think it's late enough spoilers, I don't worry. But he has one child when he's like in his 50s. And this is portrayed like this is normal reality. And by that stretch, realistically, all Thanos needs to do is just wait about 30 years, and then we've cut human population in half, I honestly can't think of a popular TV character or movie hero who intentionally started having kids in their 20s. I can't think of one real case of that. I can think of cases in film and TV, that somebody made a mistake and ended up having a kid at a younger age. But the reality is that most Americans, most people in the world have their first child while they're still in their 20s, even though it never happens intentionally in film and television. So,
it's a good point.
But why do you think people are waiting longer to have kids and having less of them, and following Hollywood's example on that, actually?
I think there's a lot. Some of it's financial. So maybe there's an element of responsibility. People have lots of student debt. They realize that there is a financial responsibility when you add on another person. Some people, people are waiting to get married. And so the average age for men and women is rising. And once people do get married, maybe they're waiting longer than maybe people did before that to have a child after the point of marriage. And so I thought that there's also people that just don't want to cramp their style. They can't travel and go out to cool, trendy restaurants and, this kind of thing. And so it just is getting in the way of the kind of lifestyle they want to live. Yeah.
I think you're very right on that. And I especially agree with the last point. I think all of those points are true. I think we as a society really stress individual happiness and fulfillment really more than any society ever has. So even like, for example, in that study, a lot of people have seen the studies. Well, people aren't as happy having kids, and that means you shouldn't have kids because it's all about your own happiness. And we see younger years as the time to live it up, as a time to have fun, the time to go on your big vacations and stuff like that. And you settle down and have kids when you don't have the energy to do that stuff anymore. Energy that literally biologically is created in us for the sake of being with children. And then
it's hard to backpack across Europe, and you got Junior in tow.
Yeah, it's also hard to wrestle with Junior when you're 60 and have your first child.
Oh, my hip.
But I think we see it as having we see raising kids as having our family, that finally getting the point of where we establish our own family rather than an act of raising a next generation. And I think it's both but I think having children has always been about raising a next generation rather than just having your own little entity in and of itself.
Well, you're talking about the individual happiness and fulfillment stuff. We're just, driving way off the course into the ditch on that in our society.
Yes, we are. Now, did the culture in which the New Testament was written always value children, Ben?
No, they didn't. The children didn't provide an immediate economic value. Done not a ton of reading on this, just very little. But from my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jews valued them maybe more than the Roman society, Greco-Roman society did. But even there, you see Jesus welcoming children and touching them, blessing them, and the disciples trying to control access to Jesus or whatever. And they're even in the Jewish culture, the children are not valued and esteemed. at least as God does. And so it's not that the Jews just, were worlds apart, but they were maybe a little ahead of the way the Greeks did it. So,
yeah, that's right. So, when I've done research on this, one fascinating thing is early Christians were accused of cannibalism of children, and the reason why actually was something that revealed problems in the Roman world, and that is that they would take in these children, and it was assumed at times, sometimes it was claimed, some sources say that's actually a myth that anyone really claimed that, but either way, that they were taking in children that were abandoned, because it was a pretty common practice. If you don't want a kid, you just abandon it. No big deal, especially somebody who has some kind of physical disability or something like that. You just abandon a child, and it's not even really that big and not really that much of a crime in the first century, especially for certain classes. But even beyond that, I mean, it's widely understood that in the first century, kids were, in the Roman world at least, kids were seen as semi-human and even below slaves. So that a lot of times wealthy households would have slaves that would be dedicated to the rearing up of children, that they would be almost like a teacher within the home, but responsible for the raising up of the child. And these slaves that worked with children would beat children and stuff like that. They would be notoriously harsh, but it was allowed because, a child is below even a slave in that society. Children are basically subhuman, and they're working towards becoming human rather than being fully human in themselves already.
Well, I've read as well that there were some people who, their moral ethical standards were not very high, and so they would also take in these abandoned children, but they would prostitute them, turn them into beggars, and sometimes they would even maim them to make them more effective as a beggar, to really tug at people's heartstrings, I guess. And so that is just very disturbing.
Yeah.
Or they turn them into gladiators, things like that.
Horrible.
Yeah.
Now, how does this anti-children mentality relate to the topic of abortion, Ben?
I think it relates a lot. I mean, you made a comment just a few minutes ago about the seeking the personal happiness, and so this individual's right to be happy and make choices for themselves. It's almost like this godlike mentality that this woman has the right to decide what happens with her body, no matter that it may affect another little woman's body, inside her own. And so if she doesn't want that person, she should not have her rights encroached on. If the woman doesn't want the child, then she should not be burdened with that child. And so, I live in Georgia with all the, stuff going on with that law that was passed, and Alyssa Milano and her sex strike, and, all of this.
That is so weird.
Maybe not
Purity
super well
rings.
thought out, but
Purity rings. Right?
Yeah, there you go.
Good Babylon Bee article. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think what's interesting with this abortion issue and value of children is, as much as sometimes it's portrayed as the pro-life versus pro-choice issue, is a question of whether or not it's human, whether or not the unborn child is human. But I think right now, most advocates for pro-choice and most speakers on behalf of Planned Parenthood, for example, wouldn't really argue against that idea. I mean, they wouldn't argue that there comes a point after the child is born that they become more human. But instead, I think it's more a statement that adult convenience is more important than guarding the vulnerable. And so effectively, they make a statement that the quality of life is greater than essence of life, which I think is wrong and dangerous, and especially when you apply that to looking at children. And one interesting thing, I was reading something online, and an actress in a show I happened to watch was tweeted something about how wonderful it was that she had an abortion when she was young, because she was in her 20s, and because she was in her 20s, even though most people have kids in their 20s, she wasn't ready for children, and she wouldn't want to have to put up with a parent who's not ready for children. And I think this is insane. And our culture should never embrace an attitude that we're not ready. It's not time for children. Time for children is when God gives in that way. But also,